Well, hello and welcome to this talk on getting the best from the NLS Maps website for family history research. I'm very grateful for the invitation to speak to you today. I would also like to thank Emma, as ever, for all her work in putting these events together and giving others the opportunity to promote things at them. The National Library of Scotland now has over 277,000 maps online, dating from the last 4 centuries. But as we add more and more online and do more with them, talks like this can be useful in giving newcomers a push start, as well as bringing others up to date with some of the newer additions. So this talk today will begin by covering some of the basics in fairly brief detail. But for those familiar with these and with our website, there will hopefully be more recent resources and tools which will hopefully be new and of interest. So what I'd like to do is start by giving a brief introduction to what maps we have online. We'll then look at some of the early maps before the 19th century that are particularly useful for genealogy. Then at the most useful Ordnance survey maps, before spending the rest of the time looking at our website, particularly at newer features and viewers. Of main importance is the various ways that items can be found, as well as the growing number of ways in which georeferenced maps can be made available. We'll look briefly too at some of the main gazetteers for finding places, as well as new tools for drawing features, saving and printing, as well as for showing heights. We'll take a quick look at our boundaries viewer too, and I'll finish by looking briefly at some of our future website plans. So the first 2 sections will be a slideshow, and then the rest of this talk will be a live demo of our website. As you might expect, the main focus of the NLS map collections is Scotland, but because the library is a United Kingdom legal deposit library, we're entitled to receive United Kingdom published mapping. And this means we've got good holdings of things like Ordnance survey maps of England and Wales too. Over half of our online maps are in fact OS maps of England and Wales. So we always say our website's a useful resource for family history across England, Scotland and Wales. We've recently been adding online the Ordnance survey of Ireland 6-inch to the mile maps dating from the 1830s to the 1960s. And this image shows one of those sheets covering Galway. But for maps before the Ordnance survey, that is, maps before the 1840s or so, the main detailed collections we have online focus on Scotland. And I'll draw from these examples initially. So let's move on, secondly, to look at some of the most useful early maps for genealogical purposes. And on our website, in the last few years, we've assembled a growing number of research guides. And if you follow this link through to look at the list of them, these are resources that are intended to provide a push start for researching particular subjects like boundaries, house and building history, as well as local history. And if I click on the Researching Local History resource and follow that through, it takes me through to a single page that runs through the most useful maps for researching local history, including things like county maps, estate maps, military maps, town plans, and so on, as well as the various Ordnance survey maps. And for each of these categories, there's a bit of supporting information, as well as links to view them on our website. So just plunging into this topic in a little more detail, the earliest maps of Scotland that were surveyed directly date from just over 400 years ago, and they're the work of Timothy Pont. Pont was very interested in both the natural landscape as well as the human landscape of farms and smaller settlements, as we can see here for the Loch Tay environs with the Ben Lawyers Ridge in the background. Many of Ponce's maps were brought together in a published atlas by Johann Blau in the 1650s. Blau's atlas included 49 maps of Scotland, and as we can see here, these include many smaller farms and settlements, often the first time these places appeared on a published map. At the same time that Pont was active, some towns were also being surveyed in detail. This shows St Andrews from the 1580s. But for many other Scottish towns, they weren't initially surveyed in detail until the 19th century. We find an important period of military map making in the first half of the 18th century. Some of the earliest town plans for places like Perth, shown here, in fact, military maps. After Perth was recaptured from the Jacobites in 1715, the Hanoverian military engineer Lewis Pettit was responsible for drawing up this plan showing the overall layout and extent of the town. Of course, after the 45 uprising, the whole of mainland Scotland was surveyed in detail under the superintendence of William Roy. And the Roy Military Survey, which survives today in physical form in the British Library, can be consulted also online on our website. After the Roy Military Survey, there was a range of new mapping created, sometimes for agricultural improvement, and there's a fine collection of estate plans which show the Scottish rural landscape in great detail. This detail is for the Earlston estate north of St Johnstown of Dalby. Also, whilst on the subject of pre-ordnance survey maps, don't forget hydrographic charts. The Admiralty was surveying the British coastline from the early 19th century onwards, and many of these show coastal settlements and harbours at least 3 or 4 decades before the earliest ordnance survey maps. Moving on to look at ordnance survey mapping, the Ordnance Survey, officially founded in the 1790s, focused initially on mapping southern England and then Ireland before work properly began in Scotland in the 1840s. Surveying proceeded generally from the southwest in Scotland to the northeast, focusing on counties, and was called the County Series. Thereafter, for Ireland, Scotland, England, and Wales, there was a comprehensive revision of the larger scales, the most detailed maps for all areas between the 1890s and the 1900s. Thereafter, we see partial revisions for more built-up areas up to the Second World War. And from the 1940s, another comprehensive set of new maps based on national grid sheet lines extended over Britain. So for all areas in Britain, they will have at the minimum 3 main dates of Ordnance Survey mapping. But for more built-up areas, there are often many more, allowing change over time to be seen more easily. On our website, we also give details of the main revision dates of mapping over time, the green dates here indicating partial revisions of the county. And for each scale of mapping too, there were clear specifications which changed over time for inclusion and exclusion, for content and symbology. And we'll look at this by looking at 3 main scales of mapping for Penzance in Cornwall. Public health concerns were the main official motivation for very detailed urban town plans. These covered all settlements with more than 4,000 inhabitants. And for virtually all of these towns, there were no more detailed maps created before this time or afterwards. At the 1 to 500 scale, adopted from 1855, any feature over 6 inches wide could be shown, and therefore there's a lot of quite minor detail that can only be seen on these town plans. As of last year, we've got 14,000 of these OS town plans now online, all of our holdings, and these cover over 500 towns in England, Scotland, and Wales. Moving down a scale to the 25-inch to the mile maps, these were authorised from 1855 onwards and are the earliest detailed OS mapping for all the inhabited regions of Britain. These include all towns and villages, as well as cultivated rural areas. So it's immensely valuable, this series, for family and local history, allowing practically every feature in the landscape to be seen. Very good as well for scrutinizing things like railways, industrial premises, and docks. Not all sheets were colored, but those that were colored showed buildings made of brick or stone in red, and buildings made of wood or iron in grey. And a few of the blue patches here with cross hatchings are for glass houses. We jump down another scale to the 6-inch to the mile scale. This is the most detailed scale, which covers everywhere, and it's a standard topographic authority. It records really all man-made and natural features in the landscape. But as we can see here, generalizes and reduces down detail, especially in urban areas. So the 6-inch is more useful for scrutinizing rural areas, showing different land use categories in the countryside. These maps also systematically record all public and administrative boundaries. Leaping on forward and leaping too into central London, the Ordnance Survey National Grid post-war series covered all areas with more than 20,000 inhabitants. And surprisingly enough, these are the earliest maps which comprehensively show building numbers, so useful for identifying particular addresses. On our website too, on the Ordnance Survey map homepages, you'll find links to lists of abbreviations explaining what those are, as well as links to what we call characteristic sheets, allowing symbols and styles of features to be seen. Just a brief word too on copyright in the United Kingdom for maps published by UK government departments. These are covered by Crown copyright, which lasts for 50 years from the end of the year in which the map was published. And these include maps by Ordnance Survey or Admiralty Charts. For maps published by commercial companies, copyright usually lasts for 70 years. And this includes maps published, for example, by John Bartholomew and Son, or W and A.K. Johnston. For maps made by named individuals, copyright usually lasts for 70 years from the end of the year in which the last remaining author of the work died. And for this reason, on our website, our mapping comes through to the early 1950s or the early 1970s, depending upon the publisher, but why we can't put later in copyright mapping online. So I'd now like to turn thirdly to look at finding maps and look directly at our website, maps.nls.uk. And we often say that a useful page for newcomers to start on is our guide to this website, which on one page runs through the various ways of finding maps. Then secondly, at the various viewers we have for viewing maps. There's a third section on inquiries and copies, a fourth section on related information, collaborative projects, historic maps, API, and then the various ways of staying informed. If all else fails, we also have a sitemap page too. And at the bottom of most of our information pages, there's a blue footer that also provides quick links to the most useful parts of the website. There's an about this site category on the left-hand side, ways of searching and viewing maps, a third column of practical information, fourth column of various collaborative projects, and then the links to stay informed and keep in touch. Just to mention particularly our recent additions page, and this presents in reverse order the most recent content that we've added online. Is a useful way of keeping in touch with new additions to the website. Wherever you are on our Maps website, there's a blue bar just beneath the header that provides a link back to the home page. And we often say in terms of finding maps that there are four main ways of finding everything. First of all, a set of browsable lists on this left-hand side. A second way of browsing by names of map makers. And then two ways that we call Mapfinder, one using a marker pin and the other using outlines. And I'll illustrate each of these. For our browsable categories, these are fairly self-explanatory. If you're interested in, say, town plans, you can click on the town plans and views page. You're then presented with an alphabetical list of towns. And for any one of these, you can click on the particular town, clicking on Aberdeen here, and I get a chronological list of town plans. For any one of these, I can click on the particular town plan of interest. There's some blurb about it on the left-hand side. And then I can click on the thumbnail image to open the map in our standard non-georeferenced maps viewer, and then use the mouse or the plus and minus buttons or pinch zoom on a tablet or on a phone to zoom on in and view the town plan in detail. I can then return back to the map's home page. And another browsable category that's often of great value are our county maps. These present an alphabetical list of counties, and I can, for any one of these, in a similar way, click on the county of interest and browse a chronological list of county plans. And for any one of these, I can click on the particular county, some blurb on the left, click on the thumbnail image on the right, and then zoom on in to view the county map in detail. As you might imagine, Ordnance survey maps are by far our biggest category, and these are organized by country, and then within each country by scale. And so, for example, I could click on Ordnance survey, 6" to the mile, first edition maps of Scotland. We'll look at the various ways of finding them and viewing them in a moment. But on this home page, this is where you find the links to the guide, to abbreviations, to symbols, to the characteristic sheets, and links to further information about the series. So I can here return back to the home page. A second way of finding everything is using our Browse by Mapmaker, and this presents an alphabetical list of names of individual map surveyors or institutions who made maps. And I can, for any one of these names, click on it. I've chosen John Ainsley here. I'm getting a chronological list of maps on our website by John Ainsley. And for any one of these, I can click on the thumbnail image to view any of these particular maps in detail. Whilst also on this zoomable image viewer, just to mention, this viewer allows you to download PDF extracts of what you can see on screen. There's links to a full screen version of the same map, just taking away the header and the footer, and then click on this standard viewer to return again. A few other different functions. And to the upper right, there are ways that you can, if you wish to, order images or printouts of the map as well. Returning back to the maps homepage, I'd now like to illustrate our Mapfinder with marker pin. And what this does is to position a pin over your area of interest, and the maps that cover that area are returned on this right-hand side. Now I'm zoomed out, and what are returned are therefore maps of the whole of Scotland or of wider areas, Europe and the world. Now, if I were to zoom in, let's say I started to zoom in on southwest Scotland, then what are returned now on the right-hand side are what we call medium-scale maps. These are maps of regions or wider areas, as we can see, covering counties or regions in southwest Scotland. Now, 165 maps is a lot to browse, and I could, if I wanted to, filter the maps on this right-hand side. I could narrow them, for example, to maps from the 1840s to the 1970s. I could also, if I wanted, filter them. If I only wanted to see Ordnance survey maps, I can filter them by type, and 93 maps are returned on this side. Now, if I continued plunging down in detail, let's say I was interested in maps of Dumfries itself and put the marker over Dumfries, I'm now seeing 24 large-scale or detailed maps on this side, arranged chronologically. And for any one of these maps to view them, I would just click on this thumbnail image, and it opens them in our standard zoomable image viewer. When I finish looking at this map, I can then return with the green back arrow and view any of the other more detailed maps covering Dumfries. It's possible too to change the background map layer. I could change it to, say, a satellite image or something like OpenStreetMap. And it's the same search process. I'd now like to jump into what we call our Mapfinder with outlines. And if I do this zoomed in on Dumfries, it will keep that same area on screen in our Mapfinder with outlines. And this is exactly the same as if I went back to our homepage and clicked on the Mapfinder with outlines from here. First of all, just to explain, the two left-hand panels allow you, first of all, to search and locate the map by place names, by grid references, or things like county and parishes. So I could, at this stage, if I wanted, scroll a list of county names. I could choose, for example, Dumfriesshire. And then if I chose Dumfries itself, it would plunge me on into the detailed area that we were looking at before. Just to illustrate at the beginning, our help page that relates to all of these different viewers, there's a three-stage process to finding maps in our Mapfinder with outlines. First of all, you choose the particular series in the lower left-hand panel. You then click on your place of interest, and the maps that cover the place that you clicked are returned over on this right-hand side. So, for example, by default, the Ordnance Survey 6-inch to the mile maps are the selected layer. And I could, just changing the background layer to an Esri topographic map, click on Dumfries, and the OS 6-inch to the mile maps that cover where I clicked appear on this right-hand side in chronological order. And for any one of these maps, to view it again, I would just click on the thumbnail image and it would open inside our standard zoomable image viewer. I could then change the particular scale of mapping. Let's say I change this 6-inch to the 25-inch to the mile mapping. You'll see our outlines are now in purple and they cover a smaller area, but it's exactly the same process. I click on my place of interest, and now the 25-inch to the mile maps that cover the point that I clicked on appear over on this right-hand side. I could cycle through all the various Ordnance Survey map scales, and it would show again the outlines for these particular scales. For example, at 1 inch to the mile, I click on the map, and the sheets that are returned for that particular scale appear here on the right-hand side. Just to mention too, it's important to use both drop-down lists. So for example, if I switch to Scotland county regional maps, by default, these would show the regional maps of Timothy Pont from 4 centuries ago, but I could choose, for example, the Blow maps. And now if I clicked on a place of interest, the Blow maps covering that place that I clicked appear on the right-hand side. At any time, I can also change the transparency of the bounding boxes. I can make those fainter or more prominent with this slider down here at this time. I can clear the results. Just to mention too, the location of my cursor is shown to the lower right of the screen as a national grid reference, as eastings and northings, latitude and longitude. And at any time as well, I can save the URL, which is specific to the particular area that we're looking at and the particular type of mapping. So for example, if I copied this particular URL and went into a new browser and pasted that URL, or I saved that URL and then put it into another browser, it would open the Mapfinder with Outlines viewer for that specific location. I'd now like to go on to look at georeferenced maps. And as I'm sure many of you know, georeferenced maps are images that have had their geographic coordinates assigned to them so they can be placed in reality, and we can also present a whole set or series of maps at one continuous layer. As with our other map viewers, there's detailed help down to the lower left-hand side. There's a search panel for place names, National Grid Reference, and Ordnance Survey historic names. And then the lower left-hand panel allows you to choose the layer that is your georeferenced overlay. So if, for example, I plunged on into Edinburgh, zoomed down on in to look at Edinburgh, by default now I'm looking at 1 inch to the mile mapping. I can, on this lower left-hand side, fade the transparency, and underneath I see a satellite image, a modern satellite image of the same area. I can then fade that back into view again. Now I could now choose various more detailed historic layers of mapping. The 6" to the mile will show greater detail. And if I chose the 25" to the mile mapping, it will show greater detail still. And it's the same arrangement when I fade the transparency now. I'm seeing satellite imagery in more detail. I can change this background layer to another satellite image layer, such as Bing satellite imagery. There's often a slightly different date and sometimes different levels of detail, or another modern map layer like Ordnance Survey or Open Data, or for example, OpenStreetMap. I can then fade the transparency to bring the historic map layer back into view. Now, because the maps are georeferenced, we can do a lot more with them. And one of the useful things that we can do are measure things like bearings, as well as areas and distances. So, for example, I could click around the Royal Scottish Academy, shown here as the Royal Institution on the Mound in Edinburgh, and double click, and it will give me the approximate area of that polygon that I've drawn. It's also possible to measure a distance if I wanted to know how far it was between two objects, or a particular route that people may have walked from one place to another. I can double click the end of this route and it will give me a distance in meters and in feet. There's also a scale bar shown down to this left-hand side. I can turn off the measurement by clicking the measurement tools up to the upper right-hand side. I'd now like to look at searching for place names, and by default, our modern place name search uses OpenStreetMap as well as an Ordnance Survey gazetteer for Scotland. And this is very useful for many places that still exist today. So, for example, I could search in for a place name like Dalkeith, for example, click on Dalkeith, and it'll take me there to look at Dalkeith. I can also search by national grid reference or by latitude and longitude if I have those numbers. But it's sometimes also useful to be able to search for historic place names. In other words, names that no longer exist today, but may well crop up in records connected to family history. Let's say I was interested in tracking down the farm name of Yearning Hall. I could type this into our modern gazetteer, but it won't find anything much of value. Now we have another gazetteer that's been gathered from the Ordnance Survey 6" to the mile maps of a century ago. And here, if I type in the same name, Yearning Hall, I've got a match. I can click on this and it will take me to Yearning Hall. I can zoom in and out. If I zoom right the way out, we can get an idea. This is on the border between England and Scotland. And if I switch into our side-by-side viewer, allowing the historic map to be put on the left-hand side and a modern satellite image on the other, and change this satellite image to be something like OpenStreetMap, we can see, in fact, there's no detail of Yearning Hall on OpenStreetMap. And if I switch, for example, to Bing satellite as an image and zoom in detail, we can see that Yearning Hall doesn't exist anymore. It's clearly there a century ago, but it's a ruin now. And that's why the OS 6" to the mile gazetteer from a century ago can be very useful for searching for historic places. Just returning from here back to our homepage. Now, if you're managing to trace your ancestors back into the 18th century, you might also find our Roy Military Survey gazetteer useful. And this was very helpfully compiled just over a year ago by volunteers. And it includes all 33,000 plus names from the Roy Military Survey of Scotland. This is divided into a map covering the Highlands as well as the lowlands. The two overlap in the Central Belt, which is why we need to show them separately. And for any particular name, you can type in a name element. I'm just typing Kirk here to illustrate the point, and it'll return 387 names that have Kirk within them. And for any one of these, I can click on the name itself and it will zoom me in to show that particular location on the Roy Military Survey maps. Returning back from here to our homepage, I'd now like to return to our Georeferenced Maps viewer to show you some of the new tools that we've introduced this year. Zooming in, first of all, on Edinburgh again, just to illustrate these in proper detail. I'll switch to the OS 25" to the mile maps for Edinburgh. One of the new buttons that we've introduced is a print save image button and tool. And if you click on this, it will give a preview of what you can see on screen. You can choose between portrait or landscape orientation, what particular page size you're interested in. You can choose a particular scale as well, and whether you wish to have a north arrow or not, or a scale bar or not. And then you have the option of saving this either by copying it as an image to the clipboard or saving it as a JPEG, a PNG, or PDF image. You can also print it if you have a printer attached. So this is a very good way of getting a screen grab of any of the georeferenced maps that we have available. Another new function we've added is the ability to draw and trace features. And the top row here allows you to add features like points, lines, polygons, or text onto the map, whilst the second row down allows you to edit the positions of features that change their style or appearance, to edit text, and also delete features. So I could, for example, decide to add a marker point onto the map for a particular building on either side of the lawn market here. I could, if I wanted to, draw a box to highlight a particular building. And I could, let's say I make an error here, double click to finish the building, and then go back to the edit features button down here to click on that polygon again to edit it and move it properly into position. I can also change the style of any of these particular features, change the line color from yellow, for example, to be blue, apply that to that particular object, or change one of these marker pins here to be a different color. I could change this to be red, for example, and apply that to that particular marker pin position. Now I can, if I wanted to export this as an image, use the print button that I've just shown before, and this would show our background map along with the annotation. But it's also possible to export the features too as vector information. So for example, I could export the file as a KML file. It's often used inside Google Earth, a GPX file. It's often used in various mobile applications relating to mapping, or as a GeoJSON file, which is an open text file recording geographic coordinates. So if I click on the export file, by default, this will export it as a KML file. My browser reports that it's saved this as sketch.kml. And I can now remove this top layer. I could bring that KML file into any of these other applications, but it's also possible to bring it back into the Georeferenced Maps viewer using this Add Layers function. And this allows you to select your particular format. This is a KML by default here. I can then browse on my computer to the Downloads folder, open that sketch to KML, click on the import, and it will show the same features that I just traced earlier. This kind of thing might also be useful if you're wanting to track the same locations or the same features on different dates of background mapping. So I could switch here to, say, the 1940s mapping for the Lawn Market area, or I could fade the transparency down at this side to show the same locations on a satellite image view. Just to say too, these new drawing tools are also available in our full screen draw viewer, as well as in our side-by-side viewer. So I'd just like to remove that drawn layer now and click the cross to close the draw features. And another newish tool we've added in the last couple of years is a show height tool. And this shows the approximate height of your cursor location. And it's quite useful, especially when you're looking at a map like this that doesn't have contour lines or any particular information showing whether you're going up or down a slope or not. Another related tool that we've added just this year is an elevation profile tool. Now, of course, if you know your way around Edinburgh, then you'll know that if you click and drag a particular route from the Grassmarket here, going up Victoria Street, it's a steep slope. But if you didn't know the area, this is where the elevation tool could be useful. You can click and drag a route, and it shows quite clearly what a steep climb it is along that particular distance. I can close the cross, appear to the upper right to switch that off again. Now, I'd now like to take a quick look too at our boundaries viewer, which from our homepage is in the second row down to the right-hand side. And the boundaries viewer allows you to view changing boundaries at three main dates, from the 1840s to the 1950s to the present day in Scotland. I can change those boundaries by toggling this date slider. By default, it shows the 1840s to 1880s boundaries. I can jump forward to the 1950s or jump right forwards to the present day. And as you'll know, over the period of the last 150 years, there were very important changes, particularly to parish boundaries and related county boundaries. And these happened especially in the 1890s and in the 1970s. So I'm looking now at the area to the east of Loch Tay in Perthshire. And in the 1840s, the 1880s, there's very complicated detached parts of parishes. There's lots of detached parts of Ween and Fortingall and Logarate. And if I switched forward to look at the 1950s boundaries, a lot of these were tidied up in the local government acts of the 1890s. You see much larger, regular areas for Dull, Ween, Dunkeld, and Kenmore. And if I jump right the way forward to the present day, the parishes disappear completely. They're not relevant at all. They have no administrative significance after the 1970s. Down to the lower left, there's also a brief history of parishes, boroughs, counties in Scotland. There's also a related page on legislation, the main parliamentary legislation relevant to counties and parishes, and also a page on the main sources, useful sources for parish information. So a useful reminder that if you have records relating to a particular parish in Scotland, it's important to make sure that you're looking at the right boundaries for the parish at the time that you're interested in. So I'd now like to finish up just by looking briefly at some of our future digitization plans. I mentioned that we were in the process of putting maps of Ireland online, and we're going to continue adding medium and smaller scale maps of Ireland up to the spring of next year. Our main big addition next year will be detailed maps of England and Wales, Ordnance survey maps of 1 to 1250, 1 to 2500, dating between the 1940s and the 1970s. We hope to have those online during the summer. We're going to continue with putting medium and smaller scale maps, both Ordnance survey maps, as well as pre-Ordnance survey maps of England and Wales online during the course of next year, and continue generally moving outwards from Scotland and Britain onto scanning maps of Europe and further afield in the years after 2024. Our aim is to roughly double the number of online maps we have by the end of 2025. We hope to have around 500,000 maps online by then, and that'll be roughly 1/3 of our paper map collections available digitally. So that's me finished. Thank you very much for listening. I hope some of that was new and of interest to you. And of course, I'm very happy to answer any questions.